Hey everyone, this is Giordano from the Juice Media. Welcome back to the Juice Media podcast, a companion to the Honest Government Ad series. This episode of the podcast is recorded on Wurundjeri land, and it is the companion to our latest Honest Government ad about hung parliaments.
You might remember us from the last ad we made about preferential voting.
We hope you haven't watched it, because the last thing we want you to know is how to use it to vote for a not shit candidate at the coming election.
You know, one who isn't owned by these guys and who'll fight for your kids' future rather than theirs.
Because if enough of you give your first preference vote to not shit candidates, some of them might win some seats and become not shit MPs.
And if that happens, this election will end up with a hung parliament.
The reason I wrote this Honest Government ad now is that we're heading for a crucial national election here in Australia in the first half of 2022. It's crucial because we cannot afford another 3 years of climate shitfuckery like the world witnessed from this government at the COP26 summit in Glasgow. And whilst their policies on climate might differ in some regards, neither major party here is promising to phase out coal and gas and transition to renewables this decade, which is what the science is saying must happen. And since a very likely outcome in the coming election is a hung parliament, which is one in which neither the shit nor the shit light party win enough seats to form a majority government on their own, they will very likely have to rely on the support of not shit candidates to form a minority government. Which is why it's so important that people understand what hung parliaments and minority governments are, and it's why we made this Honest Government ad. And to be clear, when I say not shit candidate, that's my shorthand for any party or independent candidate with strong science-based policies for dealing with the climate crisis and who does not take money from fossil fuel companies, which basically excludes the major parties. And to help us get into more detail about all this, I'm stoked to have as my guest today someone who is right at the heart of the insurgence of not shit candidates who are fronting up at this election. Simon Holmes. Simon is a whole bunch of things. He's an energy transition analyst, clean tech investor, and a pioneering force in the Australian community's renewable energy movement as a founding member of Hepburn Wind, the country's first community-owned wind farm. But most recently, he's been making headlines for his work at Climate 200, the group he created to support not shit candidates in the coming election. The government's been shitting its pants about the Climate 200 and the lineup of strong independent candidates that Simon is helping to run in this election. And so, I thought, this troublemaker would make the perfect guest for this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoy our chat, and I'll catch you on the other side. Welcome back to the Juice Media podcast, Simon Holmes. It's really good to have you back.
Great to be on, Giordano.
Last time you were on the podcast was in early 2020. We spoke about climate and energy policy. We've now upgraded. You were the first guest that we had when we took the podcast to YouTube, and now you're the first guest on the couch. On the couch. This is actually where we filmed the Honest Government ads. We've pulled the green screen aside, so this is literally behind the screen. Hopefully we'll do more of these when the chance arises. But thanks very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
As a result of the work that you've been doing, you've become a bit of a lightning rod for attacks from senior government MPs and also from the media. So can you take us on a bit of a journey? What's been happening in the last 2 years? Who are you? What have you been helping to build with the Climate 200? And why have you been pissing off all the right people?
Well, I'm Simon Holmes. I wear a lot of hats. At the end of the day, I look for what is the most effective thing I can do to get action, primarily on climate change. That's my primary purpose. So why are we going backwards and striking at the root? What is the root? The root is we have the wrong composition in Parliament to make progress on these issues. And so that's what I've been focusing a lot of effort over this year. But it really goes back to 2019 election where we got our start.
So what is the Climate 200? Why did you start this group, and what is it doing?
Climate 200, very simply, provides an opportunity for ordinary Australians to contribute to the funding of candidates who are going to get into Parliament and move us forward on a number of issues, not just climate. The 3 issues we lead on: science-based response to climate change, restoring integrity to politics, and the treatment and safety of women in Australia. So those 3 issues are sort of our founding, our North Star issues. And we provide a vehicle or a method where ordinary Australians can help people who are standing up in their communities help them have a fighting chance in a political system that's stacked very much in the favour of the party machines. Help them, help level the playing field so that they might have a chance to get in Parliament, and we achieve real representation.
Right. So then, given that all of these things are reasonable policy positions, why is the Morrison government shitting itself so much about what you're doing? Why are you such a threat?
So let me just talk from Climate 200's perspective. We don't start campaigns. We don't go looking for campaigns. We don't choose candidates. We telegraph the issues we're interested in, and campaigns come to us. There's an organisation Cathy McGowan set up called the Community Independence Project, and early this year. So Cathy McGowan was the first independent member for Indys. She was elected, I believe, the 2013 election, re-elected in 2016, and in 2019 she resigned and her seat was won by her successor, chosen by the same community group to succeed her, Helen Haynes. And it's the first time in Australia's history that an independent has handed the reins over to another independent. So Cathy set up the Community Independence Project, which was aimed at answering the question: you're in a community, you want to repeat the success of Indys. Where do you even start? Cathy ran a conference earlier this year, back in February. She ran this conference. 300 people turned up from 72 electorates, and they learned how it was done in Indys, where she ran, and also how it was done in Warringah, where Zali Steggall took the seat from Tony Abbott. Of those 300 people, there's about 30 communities around the country that have been working all year and are at fairly advanced stages with community campaigns. I reckon 20 of them will put a pretty good showing up at this election, and we've seen already about maybe 10 of them announce very, very strong candidates for these campaigns. So we wait until we see strong candidates with community backing in winnable seats that align with our values, and when they come forward, we talk to them about how we can help them, compete in the electorates that they want to contest. Yeah.
Okay. And by that helping them, you mean helping with funding, because running for an election is an expensive,
hugely expensive. So it's for a city campaign, an urban seat, you're not serious unless you've got a $1 million budget. Now, for the big parties, it's not that hard to allocate $1 million. They really only need to fight in 20 or 30 seats, the 20 or 30 marginal seats for the election.
So in a way, what you're doing is you're levelling the playing field.
Yeah, and that's not the only area where it's stacked against the income. The political parties have tax deductibility status well before the election, whereas the independents only get it in the very last few weeks.
Right.
The incumbents get printing allowances, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year of taxpayer-funded printing allowances that puts propaganda into your letterbox that taxpayers fund. Independents don't get any of that. So, yeah, an independent needs access to significant money just to be able to be on a level playing field.
My question was, why is the government shitting its pants? And I want to get back to that, because I feel like that was all really important context, but I want to get to the point of why such a threat. But before you answer the question, let me read you a quote from, this is from former Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who has described the Voices movement as, quote, a very healthy development that allows people to vote for candidates that align with their views. I'm not sure if he'd be using those words if he was still the PM. Right. But anyway, I want to read what he said to me when he was my guest on the podcast last year.
I mean, the thing that the Liberal Party needs to reflect on is that there is a number of hitherto very safe centre-right seats, Liberal/National seats, which are occupied by small L Liberal women. Mayo in South Australia, Indys in Victoria, and of course Warringah in New South Wales, and it's only by a few votes. It could have been, you could have added to that Karen Phelps in Wentworth as well. And what that tells you is, what that should tell the Liberal Party, is that there is a small L Liberal constituency that takes climate change very seriously, that is prepared to vote for somebody other than the Liberal Party, and but does not, may not vote for Labor or the Greens. If you were making the case for another party, which I'm not, that's something you would point to.
So my question to him here was whether he'd consider forming another party, and basically what he's saying is no, this independence movement is, or the insurgents, as people are calling it now, is for him is where it's actually at in terms of an alternative to the Liberal Party. So he says...
And if you think about it, in the House of Representatives of 151 seats, where every seat counts, naturally, to have 3 safe Liberal seats held by smaller Liberal independents, those metropolitan seats, smaller Liberal seats, I think there's a very strong message there.
Has the Liberal Party gotten the message from the 2019 election about the threat?
Well, the Liberal Party has taken a deliberate decision to abandon these seats.
Right.
Actually, so Kylie Tink is the independent candidate for North Sydney.
Right.
She put it really eloquently in her campaign launch. She said that she doesn't recognise the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party doesn't recognise her.
Right.
When Morrison stood up some months ago, he said climate policy will not be dictated by in the inner city wine bars, cafes, and dinner parties. He was basically saying to Kylie, "You don't matter." Right? She's voted Liberal her entire life, and she got loud and clear. You're not the priority. We're listening to other people these days. And look, I think most Australians really aren't strongly left or strongly right. Most Australians are in the middle. We're a bit left on some things. I think most Australians are a bit left on social issues, and maybe a little bit right on economic issues. So when the Liberal Party moves further and further to the right, where it goes for a decade without having any credible climate policy, where it has a immigration policy that is built around cruelty rather than compassion, or even the economic value of migration, and where it appeases far-right MPs who want to fight against vaccination and anti-science messaging. When
you're not talking about Craig Kelly, are you?
Craig Kelly and George Christensen and Matt Canavan, etc. The federal government will never seriously reprimand them or say these are not Australian values or try to shut them down. Where I live in Kooyong, the state seat is held by Labor and my council ward is held by Greens. It's very much changing, and those people, we don't feel represented by the Liberal Party that Josh Frydenberg votes with every time. But most people don't see themselves as going for as switching their vote to Labor or the Greens, and they're hungry for an alternative, and the independents are coming in and occupying that centre ground, that centrist space that Morrison has he's vacated, quite deliberately vacated, to chase a new vote, but taking for granted that he would always have that because there was no alternative. So yeah, they hate us because we're providing an alternative that the electorate wants.
It sounds this is a democratic process. This is how it unfolds.
Yeah, they're hating democracy, right?
Yeah,
this is not a top. They're having so much trouble understanding this movement. It's not top down. There's no voices of central office, or there's no charter or franchise or logo or anything. It's people who read Cathy McGowan's book or watched, might have seen a documentary on what happened in Indys in 2013, or they've watched Zali Steggall, and they've been self-organising. They've been running town hall meetings on Zoom all the way through the pandemic. They've been building up. I've been on many of these town hall meetings where you'll have 200-300 people on an evening, listen to experts and talk about the values of what's important in those electorates. This is a democratic revival going on. It's really exciting, really exciting. But the government doesn't understand it, is flip-flopping its messages all over the place. Earlier this week, we had Tim Wilson say that this movement is just going to damage Labor and the Greens. And then the next day, we had Morrison saying this was a front for Labor and the Greens. It's like they can't work it out because they don't think they've had much experience with democracy.
I think you're being kind. I think they've worked it out, and they're trying to find something that will stick. Like these different messaging, the contradictory things. It's like, let's see what people respond to, because ultimately they want to disempower this movement, and the best way to disempower movements is through fear campaigns. Fear campaigns. I mean, John Howard was a master of it, but they've been used on both sides of politics, and they're very effective. We saw it with the Mediscare campaign. We saw it with the death tax. It's kind of become the game now, and I mean, it's almost impossible that we're not going to see a massive scare campaign. And at the moment,
there will be a massive scare campaign. At
the moment, the one that I think is being pushed by the Morrison government, and which might become the election issue, is this fear campaign about a hung parliament. And this is really something that we play on in the Honest Government ad that we've made, let's get a bit nerdy now. Perhaps you could explain what a hung parliament is, and why is the Morrison government scaremongering about this potential outcome?
Yeah. Okay. So hung parliament is when all the votes are tallied and all the electorates have been decided which way they went. It's what you call it when no party on its own has a majority of seats. Very common in governments. In parliaments all around the world. It's the dominant outcome in Europe.
Not in the US and the UK, or maybe the UK, but definitely in the US, but definitely in a lot of Scandinavian and European countries. Absolutely. It's quite common.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now in Australia, it takes 76 seats to govern. The Liberal Party only has 60. It governs only because it forms a coalition agreement with the National Party, which has 16 seats at the moment, so that gets it, in the lower house, that gets it to just on 76, and with a couple of crossbenchers, 76 is a majority of one. Hung parliament is what you call it at that moment when no party has a majority. Then the MPs that have been duly elected come together and form an agreement on how the next parliament might operate. When it's clear that a government can be formed, where there is confidence in a leader and a majority of MPs will give supply, then we reach a new level of stability called a minority government. And we've had this many times before in Australia. So we basically have minority government now because the Nationals and the Liberals have a secret agreement between them. But we had a minority government between 2010 and 2013 when, do you remember, it was about a 2-week period after the election when basically it came down to Tony Windsor and Rob Oakeshott spent about 2 weeks interviewing, working very hard.
These are independent candidates, yeah?
Independents, yep. They were independents from traditionally conservative seats, traditionally Nationals seats, and they took their responsibility very, very seriously. They had endless consultation with Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, and they formed the opinion after much consultation that the best way forward for Australia was to form minority government with Julia Gillard's party. And a lot of really good things came out of that period. Now, it wasn't just Rob Oakeshott and Windsor. They also had Andrew Wilkie down in Tasmania and Adam Bant from the Greens. And the crossbenchers give the government backbone. They gave Gillard the backbone to bring in real climate legislation with teeth. They brought in price on carbon that worked. It brought emissions down. They brought in ARENA, the Renewable Energy Research Agency, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation.
Everything you said, this minority government. So before the Gillard minority government in 2010, we actually hadn't had a federal minority government since like 1940 something. So it was actually quite an unusual thing at the federal level. As you said, state level, it's a much more common thing. But that minority government that we had in 2010 introduced a lot of the Clean Energy Act and all the things that you've said, which are really good. But the way that it's played out is that it gave Tony Abbott, who was the leader of the opposition during the Gillard government, an opportunity which he seized 100%, and he seized to criticise, to attack the Gillard government for this minority government, because their argument then became, you vote for the Labour Party, you get the Greens. Even though, as you said, it wasn't like the Greens weren't like there was 1 seat from the Greens and 3 from the Independents, so it was actually a majority independent crossbench.
say what you will about Tony Abbott, but he was a very effective communicator.
Yeah.
And with the full weight of the media friendly to him, which, face it, is an incredibly powerful force in Australia. Yeah. He was able to prosecute an argument. He was able to make that look like an undesirable government. But actually, if we look at all of the governance we've been subjected to over the last decade, that's been stronger than any other period. Any other period. And I think it's because every idea that that comes to the parliamentary floor has to be discussed. And with MPs, that one thing I bang on about, if you think about a member of parliament in the political parties, in say the Liberal or Labor Party, number one loyalty for so many MPs is their own career, right? They can see a pathway to the top, to either the ministry or maybe even a prime minister, and that number one loyalty is to their career. Number two, probably their faction. Number three, their branch, because they want to get re-elected. Number four, the party. Number five, the donor. And number six, the electorate.
Right.
Now, if you're an independent MP, you're not going to get into the ministry and you're not going to be prime minister. You're going to parliament for one reason only: your electorate. Rather than the 6 tiers of responsibility, with the electorate being number 6, the independent is answerable to their communities. And I know people have said that one of the most amazing things about Cathy McGowan's time in Parliament, and Helen Haynes has continued this tradition, is you go to their office in Parliament House, and there'll be ordinary citizens from Indys that have come up to see how Parliament works. And they're being consulted on issues, and then those MPs go back also to their electorates, and they ask people, when there's a tough decision, they ask people how they should vote. They consult, and most of them are publishing their votes and the reason they made their votes. Conversely, I'm told that when you're a government MP, as you walk into the chamber, there's a board, a little board on the wall where you pick up a pager and it tells you how you're going to vote on every vote. And you often get MPs, when there's a division and the ayes have to stand on one side and the noes on the other, people will move across and they'll say amongst themselves, what are we voting on? They've just looked at their little pager, right? So just that stark difference. That excites me. Yeah,
no, totally. I mean, I think, it's been said that on some issues like marriage equality, everyone's allowed to vote their conscience. And,
conscience votes.
Normally. But with an independent candidate, every vote they make is a conscience vote. It shocked
me to learn that there have only been about 30 conscience votes since World War II in Australia.
Right.
Only 30 times, right? And there are thousands of votes a year. And in almost all of them, all but 30, the MPs do as they're told. We used to have some MPs who'd cross the floor, but in the last decade, that's pretty much evaporated.
Totally. I would just say that, we don't have to get into this, but, the flip side of that is that there is also a strength in having what you might call party discipline. So if you've got a party, you can't pick out, I think the danger and concern for some people is that you can, if it comes down to one MP, say one independent like Jackie Lambie or Rex Patrick, you can pick that and just, the party can sort of not buy their vote, but they can say, hey, we'll give you a swimming pool in this electorate or whatever. And so they're not constrained by that party discipline. And so they can sometimes go in a direction that you might not want. No, and that's...
Look, I think if more MPs were prepared to cross the floor, then the hazards for that would be reduced.
So just getting back to the Tony Abbott, that was a very, as you acknowledged, that was a very powerful criticism. And Morrison is reviving this criticism now. It's basically, even though it's been 10 years...
It's all he's got.
Sorry?
It's all he's got, right? Is to try to take people back to a sense that it wasn't a functioning parliament. But and that's one of the challenges, that it was a highly functional parliament. It actually met, where we've moved in recent years to the parliament doing everything they can to avoid to reduce the number of sitting days in the parliamentary calendar and to slow down the process. But they got through an awful lot of fantastic lot of real reforms in Australia, and we improving the lot for Australians, in positioning ourselves for the 21st century, that's we're well into, means constantly finding the reform and fighting for the reforms that make a better country, and we've stopped that since the Abbott era. Right.
This being the case, what we're seeing now, it seems to me, Morrison has zoned in or honed in on this threat, basically saying if you vote for independence, you're going to end up with that terrible government that you had in 2010. It's going to be a repeat of all that, and you're not really voting for, you're basically voting for this flawed minority government process. And I just want to I think that the argument that they've found that really resonates with people is that you're not getting what you think you're getting. But can you argue that really when you vote for the Liberal Party, you're getting what you're voting for either? Because as we saw in the lead up to Glasgow, the Liberal Party can't do anything on climate unless the Nationals agree to it. So in a sense, that is a minority government structure too. And I think people have really exposed that reality with the net zero target debacle, where basically Barnaby Joyce...
We saw that, some people call it the Morrison-Joyce government. Really, it was the Joyce-Morrison government.
Right.
Joyce drew a line in the sand saying, you will not go past this point. And Morrison had to acquiesce to that.
Right.
And what was that point? It was the action that Morrison took the same policy to Glasgow that Abbott took to Paris. It's a 6-year-old target that Morrison took. And the reason he couldn't go any further was because Barnaby Joyce wouldn't let him go further. So we have a dysfunctional parliament right now. I mean, think of just name one significant reform or one significant thing that Parliament has done since the last federal election. I can't think of one.
Oh, there was a wonderful shooting range that they built in.
The clay target range.
That's right. Don't forget about that, Simon.
A lot of pork. Okay, apart from the pork, what have we seen in an entire term? In fact, let's take it back to 2013. What have we seen that has advanced the position of Australia in the world or the life of the average Australian?
No, we've seen a lot of things disappear, like car manufacturing industries.
The tertiary sector's been gutted, and then I think a lot of people are incredibly frustrated about the incompetence through this COVID pandemic.
Just to round off this conversation, there is a chance that if the Liberal Party loses some seats to what we call not shit candidates, meaning climate conscious candidates, which the Climate 200 movement is supporting, it'll trigger a hung parliament. Do you see a scenario in which those independents, as you said, after the 2010 election, there was a real serious consultation process, like who do we form minority government is? And obviously Morrison's saying if you vote for these people, they're gonna form a minority government with Labor, but they could also form a minority government with the Morrison government.
Absolutely.
Are you open to that possibility, or are you?
Look, it's not my choice.
Right.
It's not my choice. But what I know is that the Morrison government is not serious about acting on climate change. They've put a line in the sand saying they're not going to move any further than where Tony Abbott was in 2015. On the last day of the Glasgow conference, there was a communique everyone signed on to, including Australia, saying that we would come back next year with revised 2030 targets. And less than 24 hours later, Australia said, no, we're not going to. Right? We've drawn a line in the sand. They've said we will not go further than Tony Abbott's climate policy. So I think it's untenable that that government stays governing the country while they're immovable on that. On that, and the same thing with integrity. To not have a federal integrity commission when we have seen so much corruption. Let's be frank, it is corruption. We've seen so much in this last term, and I mean this year has been shocking revelations on treatment and safety of women from Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame, Julia Banks's revelations in her book, Christine Holgate, Kate, the accuser in the Christian Porter allegations, which he strenuously denies, and and Rochelle Miller just in recent weeks. And the government response to all of this has been close to nothing. In fact, he said that women are lucky that they're not getting shot
in the street.
So
is this another reason they're shitting themselves? Because almost all of these candidates, independent candidates, are women. And can the Morrison even handle like a crossbench full of like fiery, outspoken, educated women?
One thing is fascinating. So it does. I know of 16 independent candidates, most of whom are announced, 14 of which are women. And when I go around to these, meet up with voices of online seminars, or I've met a few of them in person, I am amazed and impressed that about 80% of the people who turn up to these are women. Not surprisingly, 80% of the candidates that they've put forward are women, and very, very impressive, strong women who have had a gutful of where we are and the inaction on this issue.
Right.
So Morrison, he could very well be in a position in a few months' time where he has to sit down and negotiate with this crossbench to form government, and to have spent the months leading up to the election denigrating and insulting them seems like a pretty poor strategy to me.
Right. So we've spoken a lot about the criticism and attacks that are coming from the government. They're not the only people worried about what Climate 200 and the Voices movement is doing. There's also concerns from Labour voters and from Greens voters that this will peel votes away from them. And I think, so perhaps could you is there anything you can say to those people who have these concerns? Is this movement a threat?
We all know about the concept of marginal seats.
Can you explain, just in case people aren't...
Sorry, I said everyone understands, but let me take it through. That there are 151 seats. In any election, there's really only 20 or 30 seats that are in play. Everyone in the political class goes into it knowing which seats are vulnerable. They're either they're polling and demographic shifts tell the pollsters, tell the strategists that these particular 30 seats are where the action is. And there are a whole lot of seats. The vast majority of seats in Australia, I hate to tell your viewers and listeners that most of those seats, vote, you don't matter.
They're safe, right? Yeah.
They're safe, right? They're not going to flip. That's a marginal seat.
Right. It's very interesting because marginal sounds like it's on the margins that it doesn't matter, but actually...
No, they're held by a fine margin.
Right. So, and in the United States, they call them swing... I think that's swing states, which I think is a better state because it's like, it could swing either way. Yeah. Marginal makes it sound like it's not important, but actually, you're right. These are the most important seats.
No, it's better terminology, I think, in the US.
Right.
That swing, that they're in play.
Right. Now, so having explained that...
Okay.
Yeah.
So this independence movement is creating a new class of seats. They are swing seats, but they're not. These swing in Australia is swing between Labor, Greens, and Liberal National, right? Swing. These independent seats are bringing a whole bunch of other seats in play. And there's probably going to be 15 to 20 of them where there will be a strong independent candidate. And it's unsurprising that they've risen up in areas that are government held.
Right.
Now, people often say, why are they all coalition seats? They're coalition seats because the coalition's in government.
Yeah.
If we had a Labor government and people were as pissed off with the Labor government as they're pissed off with the Morrison government, you would see independents running in those seats. But in this coming election, there are going to be 15 to 20 seats to watch where there'll be an independent running in almost all cases.
Safe Liberal seats, not...
Considered safe.
Right.
Considered safe.
So these independents aren't running in what we call marginal or swing states that could go Labor
They're
or
not,
Greens.
So these independents are almost all not running in what the pollsters would call marginal seats. Right. They're running in seats where we call them safe Liberal because the Liberals there are safe against Labor and Greens. They're seats like Warringah, where Zali Steggall is. So Warringah was never going to choose Labor or Greens.
Right. So this is what Malcolm was saying in that quote. These are seats where people won't vote. Very few
That's
people
why
vote
Morrison's
Labor.
taken them for granted.
Right.
Like North Sydney, I think it's the fourth richest electorate in the country. They're progressive. but they just don't identify as
Right.
Labor, or on the whole, as Labor or Greens. And Kooyong, the same.
Right.
Goldstein, where Tim Wilson is, the same. These seats they're safe against Labor.
Right.
But what our thesis is, and our polling shows this absolutely the case, is that they're not safe against an independent that is speaking to the centre.
Yeah. So if I understand you correctly, if people are Labour voters or Greens voters, if I understand what you're saying correctly, is this isn't a threat, because we're not talking about seats that would ever go Labour or Greens anyway.
It's not a threat to Liberals in seats where there's not this dynamic either.
Right.
So just as there's only about 20 marginal seats, there's only about 20 of these government independent fights. The other 110, 120 seats in the country, I'm sorry, you're the main event is elsewhere.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's Climate 200 is. We are speaking to people around the country. We are providing them an avenue. If you live in one of these, boring seats where there's not going to be, there's no real game playing, you can contribute to the fights that are happening in the seats that are in play through Climate 200. That's who we're speaking to.
Right.
And 6,700 people I saw this morning have donated to Climate 200 so far.
Right.
So this is a growing movement.
If you happen to be living in one of these 15 seats, safe considered Liberal seats, you've got a chance to change this government. If you're not living in one of those seats, just vote how you normally would.
Vote how you normally would, right?
Right.
This is no threat
Right.
to any candidate outside these seats.
Right.
But if you are in one of these seats and you want it to flip, and you're a Labor or Greens voter,
Right.
your best bet is to put your number one preference with the independent. And if they can come in, they might come in first and in first preferences and easily get across the line. And we expect that for Helen Haynes and Zali Steele. For a whole bunch of others, they'll come in second, but they will roll up on preferences for a win. So if you're Labor and Greens and you're not in one of these seats, do what you normally do.
Yeah, and I mean, if you are a Liberal voter or even a Labor voter, there's always. I mean, we have an amazing electoral system. The preferential voting system is a really good. Like, I look at the UK and I look at the US, and I'm like, how do people even matter? It gets worse and worse. You're always forced to vote for the lesser of the two shits, basically. Whereas here you can actually, and I really encourage people to watch the preferential voting video that we made, to which this one that we've just made about hung parliament as a companion. Because, there's an added layer of safety to what we're just saying, is that if you are in one of these seats and you want to see some change, you can put one for one of these climate conscious, integrity conscious independents, and you can put two for the Liberal Party, so that that if they don't win, it'll still go to the Liberal Party anyway, or Labor, or whatever your second preference is.
Yeah, you have to put the independent one. We in the last Parliament, Karen Phelps. She narrowly got in the by-election, and she narrowly lost. Even though she increased her primary slightly, she lost in the federal election in 2019. Fascinating. She improved her primary, but it was all on preference flows that she lost. And it was so close. If only 1,200 voters had in their preferences down the ticket, if 1,200 voters had put Karen ahead of Labor rather than the other way around, Karen Phelps would be the member for Wentworth.
Right.
So it can be very, 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 very close. A very close win or a close loss. And unfortunately, in politics, coming second doesn't count for much.
I feel like my message again is like, if you're thinking about how to vote, you get to know the preferential voting system, because what it does is it really makes your vote count. If you want to throw your vote away, just give it to one of the party. Vote one for Labor or Liberal. They were going to win that seat anyway. But if you really want to make it count and go further, actually put someone first who really represents your views, and then you can put Liberal Party second or Labor Party second, and you're making your vote really count. Then.
If you're frustrated that Australia hasn't made progress on climate, integrity, or treatment of women, and you have one of these strong independent candidates running, you have to put them first. And then there's a chance. There's a very real chance in a lot of these seats that we're going to have change. And as you do so well in your video explain, things are so finely balanced that just one or two independence might be what it needs to give the next government of whichever stripe, to give them the backbone to deal with these issues.
Yeah. Now, I really want to ask you this question as well, because basically when we're talking about independence, we're talking about not shit independence, and it's very clear, because there are some shit independence.
There's some shit independence. And that's one of the things we're up against, that some people have, I guess, Pauline Hanson was the original shit, in our lifetimes, the original shit independent, right? She started not as a party, but Pauline Hanson, a rogue independent, and she was shit. She still is.
I just want to make it clear that the way we define shit and not shit is, I've narrowed it down to climate policy, because, there are some people go, oh, well, Pauline Hanson says this, which I like. I say, yeah, but if you're looking at a climate policy, which just so happens to be the thing that, will decide whether the human species will continue living on the planet, which is kind of important. You can make draw a line between who is shit and not shit. But I want to ask you this, because, okay, so all these candidates are pro-climate, but I think the question that some people might have then, why not support the Greens? Because they've had all of these policies. They've been, strong science-based policies.
Yep.
They've put forward a bill for an anti-corruption watchdog.
Yeah.
So, and I think some people might feel like, why not, vote for them?
Well, look, I hate to say it, but in like Kooyong, where I live, the Greens are not in a position where they can win, where they can win a seat in the federal election. They can win a local government ward, and we've seen Labor win a state government division. But in these seats, like Warringah, we have to face it. These seats are they are centre right. They are fiscally conservative, and they don't identify culturally with the Greens. If you took them down with a blind, took them through a blind taste test of policies, I think many would be surprised where they sit on the spectrum. But we've done focus groups and electorates voters in these electorates. They vote Liberal, holding their nose. And they don't see themselves as part of the tribe of Labor and the Greens, even though on the issues like climate and integrity and women, they would have a lot in common. Now, they may not have progressive policies on franking credits or whatever, but it's a real case, I think, of perfect and being the enemy of the good, and in this case, the good fighting for the things that really matter. Wow, we don't want to go back, or we don't want to have another 3 years of what we've just been through, or another 9 years of what we will have been through by the time the election campaign comes around.
Simon, thanks for answering all these questions. I just want to ask you one more thing. That the Morrison government, with Labor's support, has just introduced amendments to electoral laws which force entities to register as a significant third party if they spend more than $250,000 on electoral expenditure. A lot of people are saying this is aimed at you, like the Climate 200 and the Voices movement.
It's quite fun.
Is it a threat? Has it been? Right.
No, we're scratching our head. So we were going to register as a political campaigner in February, but because of these changes, we had to register. We registered, a few days before this recording. Right. So that's the only impact that came to us, was filling out a form and sending it off to the AEC. No, this doesn't affect us, and it doesn't affect the independents. It doesn't affect the voices of, or any of the other groups working for, working directly on democratic reform. But it does affect the charity sector, and through my work with the Australian Environmental Grant Makers Network, seen firsthand that environmental organisations are getting pushed out of the public sphere. They are increasingly afraid to speak up and advocate on behalf of the environment, and this is just another one of the measures that the government is using to shut down debate, to push people out, push inconvenient actors out of the public sphere.
We need quiet Australians, that don't speak up.
Certainly the government is creating a whole new class of quiet Australians.
Sorry, I lied about that being the last question, because I really want you to end just by we spoke about the seats where these independents are running. Can you just name some of them, and maybe we'll put them up on the screen?
Gee, I hope I don't forget any of them. I can tell a little story about each one of these. So Wentworth, which was held by Malcolm Turnbull and then Karen Phelps, and now Dave Sharma. Allegra Spender is running for that. And Allegra, it's funny that talking about this group as being a front for Labor. Allegra's father was a Liberal MP.
Liberal family, yeah. Right.
Allegra's grandfather negotiated the ANZUS Treaty and was Menzies treasurer. Right. She's a successful businesswoman. She just happens to think that looking after the planet that will support her children is kind of important.
Right. So definitely not a Greens communist Marxist, cultural Marxist.
No.
They're being painted by the government.
Which would disappoint the Greens cultural Marxists, right? She's not going to agree with them on everything.
Right.
Then North Sydney, Trent Zimmerman's seat. Kylie Tink is an excellent candidate there. She's got a lot of momentum behind her, doing so well. Mackellar is the seat north of, up the Sydney Northern Beaches, one north of Warringah, where Zali Steggall is. Mackellar, Sophie Scomps is challenging Jason Falinski. Up in Mackellar. Then Hume, Angus Taylor's seat, that stretches from Sydney's southern suburbs all the way down Goulburn and below, south of there. And Penny Ackery is a teacher, is challenging that. Mm-hmm. Then when you get to Victoria, we've got Dr. Monique Ryan in Kooyong, head of paediatric neurology at the Royal Children's Hospital. She's challenging Josh Frydenberg. Yep. We've got Zoe Daniel, former ABC foreign correspondent in Goldstein, challenging Tim Wilson,
your mate. You guys get on well.
We get on really well. That's sort of in Brighton and on the beaches, Sandringham down on the beaches. Right. Flinders. There are actually two candidates in Flinders that are that are challenging the seat. That's Greg Hunt has indicated that he will retire at the next election, and we don't know who's been pre-selected to replace him. Then there's a strong independent, Rob Priestley in the seat of Nichols next to Indys. I forgot in Hughes up in Sydney, Craig Kelly's seat. There's two independents there. Craig's I don't know if Craig will really contest that seat. He's not even polling single digits. Sorry, he's in the single digits. He's not even in double digits yet. Mm-hmm. So it's unlikely that Craig would run in that seat. He'll probably move to the Senate and try to do something for Clive.
You just don't know what Clive Palmer's going to do at the last minute. Yeah. I'm just like, that's the wild card.
Exactly. You don't know. You don't know. And he spent $84 million on the last election and won it for the coalition. Mm-hmm. He's probably what he will do. He'll denigrate both parties right to the end, and 2 weeks before the election, he'll flip his allegiance across to the Liberal National Coalition, right. And he'll win he'll try to win the election for them. Right. That's what he'll do. Over in South Australia, Joe Dyer has announced. Joe was one of the spokespeople for the Friends of Kate, who from the Christian Porter allegations, which he denies, I have to say. And
you don't want to get sued again.
I don't want to get sued. And then up in Queensland, Susie Holt, who I haven't met, but he's a very strong candidate in Groom, which is around the Toowoomba area. Is running. So there, Tasmania. There's some people putting. There's a party looking at a Senate, a go at the Senate, and I think that's very, very interesting there. Mm-hmm. Couple of candidates in the ACT Senate, very strong there. Kim Rubenstein and just announced very recently David Pocock, the rugby player, both announced for the ACT Senate. Nothing so far in WA, where I'm from.
Right.
What
do you think? Are you thinking of getting into politics, Simon? Is that
No,
would you
I think
ever run?
I'm close enough to the action, and
right.
It's not for me. But I think what I'm doing is the most effective thing I can be doing. Yeah.
You didn't mention obviously there's a lot of other seats, but for example, there's also obviously Greens candidates and again Sonia Semmons is one, for example, who's running in Higgins.
Impressive candidate in Higgins. Yeah. Yep.
So there are independents, there are green candidates who are all, as you said, trying to run on a platform of strong climate policy, integrity, and if you live in one of these seats, you have an opportunity to make a change, work out how preferential voting works. It really makes a difference. Help other people to understand it. Maybe share our video or explain it in your own words. Whatever works. But
put the Indy number 1.
Yeah, right. Just to finish off, Simon, you've been taking a lot of heat for you've put yourself in a position. How are you coping with all that personally?
No, it's
how's your skin? Is it thick? How are you dealing with it all? Is it stressful?
No, it's. Someone asked me the other day. I spent 6 years at boarding school. This is nothing compared to boarding school, right? Lights off
You've been
at
like
night
in
after
Lord of
boarding
the
school.
Flies.
Yeah, absolutely. I've survived Lord of the Flies. This is
Right.
nothing compared to that.
Okay.
It's very gratifying to see this. It's real democratic revival and meeting amazing people around the country. This is very exciting, and I'm loving it. And none of the I haven't felt any of the attacks have been personal and landed a blow yet.
Right.
Fingers crossed.
Right. Well, thanks for a lot of the people who stepped up. I just want to say, the people who have stepped up to become independent candidates, they're like average Australians, they're workers, they're doctors. It takes quite a lot of courage to put yourself in this position.
It's a big decision to stand up, because when you stand up, when Oliver Yates stood up last time to stand against the Treasurer, a phone call was made to his work and he was let go that same day. Right? When you stand up against this government, you will never get a job in the public service. You'll never get a government appointment or a cushy little position on the Administrative Affairs Tribunal. If you've got a government contract you've got a business that does work for the government, it won't be renewed. When you stand up against this government, a lot of doors will close. So it's a really big decision. You've got to really, really want it, and to think that risk is worth it. So my hat's off to the mostly women and a few men who have decided that it's worth it. It's worth it. So while they at one level are ordinary Australians, they're extraordinary Australians. They've got all of these opportunities before them, and they're putting themselves on the line, putting themselves to much more risk than I have.
Which is why it's been referred to as an insurgence, because it does feel like a little bit of a sort of like a Star Wars rebellion. That's
maybe there's some safety in numbers. But they're extraordinary people, and I hope that Australia gets to meet them as representatives on the crossbench of the next government.
These people have stepped up. Now it's up to us to support them if that's what we want. Simon, I really want to thank you for coming back. The last time you came on the podcast, we geeked out about energy policy, and I really want to
what's going to be next time.
Yeah, well, we'll see. And thank you again for helping people to understand a lot of stuff. If you don't follow Simon, we'll put on Twitter, we'll put the link in the show notes. And Simon's I've learned a lot of stuff from Simon, explaining energy policy and climate policy and land use and all emissions. You're a very good science communicator, and now you've put on another hat, which is actually trying to provide a political solution, or at least facilitate a political solution. So thanks for not being a quiet Australian. Thanks for coming back on the podcast, and hope to have you back soon.
Thank you very much, and remember, vote one independent.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Juice Media podcast. Whether you're just learning about electoral politics or someone who's been following it closely, I hope there was something there for you. Before I go, I want to point out that this Honest Government ad about hung parliaments is the follow-up to our Honest Government ad about preferential voting, which if you haven't already seen, I encourage you to, because it helps to explain how to use preferential voting to elect not shit candidates. Over 1 million people have seen the preferential voting video in the 3 years since we made it, so I'm hoping that many more voters at this election have a better understanding of how it works, and of how, unlike the US and the UK where you're forced to vote for the lesser of two evils, we have an awesome electoral system that allows you to safely vote one for a not shit candidate, because as long as you put shit or shit light after them, depending on your preference, your vote will flow to your second choice should your not shit candidate fail to get enough votes to win their seat. So it's a win-win. If you want to follow Simon Holmes at court or learn more about the Climate 200 movement and support the various independent candidates mentioned, you'll find links in the video description on YouTube or the show notes if you're listening on your podcast app. Thanks to Alan for helping to produce and edit the Juice Media podcast, and as always, thank you to our patrons who make the podcast and the Honest Government ads possible. In particular, our patron producers who support us via our highest patron tier of $100 a month. Thank you. If you value our work, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/The Juice Media. You've been listening to the Juice Media podcast with me, Giordano. We'll be taking a break in January to recharge and get ready before the election shit show next year. So I want to wish you and your loved ones all the best for the new year ahead. I'll catch you when we publish our next Honest Government ad. Until then, take care.